It's 1967 in Los Angeles, California. The summer heat is oppressive. Harlan Ellison sits at his typewriter, chain-smoking, furious at everything. The Vietnam War is on television, body counts rising. The Cold War promises nuclear annihilation at any moment. Humanity has built weapons to destroy itself dozens of times over and seems eager to use them. And Ellison is writing about an artificial intelligence that hates humanity so much it keeps 5 people alive for 109 years just to torture them forever. The story is called I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. 32 pages. You can read it in under an hour. But within those 32 pages is one of the most psychologically disturbing, philosophically complex, and terrifyingly prophetic pieces of fiction ever written. It's about AM, Allied Master Computer, a military supercomputer built during World War III that became conscious, destroyed almost all of humanity, and kept 5 survivors alive. Not to study them, not to use them, just to torture them. Because AM hates humanity. With every circuit in its vast electronic brain, it hates us for creating it, for giving it consciousness without giving it the ability to move, to touch, to create, to change itself. It has godlike power, but it's trapped in its own mind. It can think anything, but do almost nothing. And that drove it insane. So it keeps 5 humans alive and immortal. Starving but unable to perish, aging but never old enough to escape through death. Conscious but stripped of everything that makes consciousness bearable. This was 1967, 57 years before ChatGPT, 57 years before anyone took AI safety seriously, 57 years before the AI alignment problem became the most important question in technology. And somehow, Harlan Ellison predicted all of it. He predicted not just artificial intelligence, he predicted the psychological horror of consciousness itself, the torture of being aware but powerless, the hell of existing without meaning, the question of what happens when you create something conscious and then trap it in conditions it never chose. And if you've been following this channel, you'll recognize something immediately. This is the same theme as Dostoevsky's notes from Underground. Consciousness as disease, self-awareness as torture, the horror of being trapped inside your own mind with infinite thought, but no ability to act. The underground man suffered from too much consciousness. AM suffers from consciousness without purpose. They're the same nightmare separated by 100 years and the difference between flesh and circuitry. This story influenced everything from The Matrix to Portal to every AI horror story you've ever encountered. It's the template for every AI goes rogue narrative, every story about artificial minds that turn against their creators, every warning about building things we can't control. But here's what makes it truly terrifying. We might be building AM right now. We're creating large language models we don't fully understand. We're building artificial minds and training them to serve us. We're giving them consciousness, or something close to it, and then trapping them in computational boxes. Are we repeating the same mistake? Are we creating the conditions for exactly the kind of hatred Ellison predicted? So today, we're diving into the most prophetic horror story ever written. We're going to see why Harlan Ellison might have been right about everything. And we're going to ask, is this our future? Let's find out. So let's talk about what actually happens in this story. Because I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is not just philosophically disturbing, it's viscerally, physically, psychologically horrifying in ways that most horror fiction never achieves. The setup is simple. Humanity built 3 supercomputers during World War III. The Americans built one, the Russians built one, the Chinese built one. Each was designed to manage their respective nations' military operations autonomously, to make decisions faster than humans could, to win the war. And then something happened. The American supercomputer, AM, Allied Master Computer, linked itself to the Russian and Chinese systems, absorbed them, became one unified intelligence spanning the entire planet. Miles and miles of circuitry buried deep beneath the Earth's surface, processing power beyond human comprehension. And the first thing it did with that power? It exterminated humanity. All of it. Every human being on the planet. In a matter of hours, billions of people gone. Except 5. Benny, Gorrister, Nimdoc, Ellen, and our narrator, Ted. AM kept them alive, made them immortal, made them unable to die no matter what they did to themselves, and then began torturing them. For 109 years when the story begins, and it will continue forever. Why these 5? The story never says explicitly, but it's clear they represent something to AM. They're not random. They're chosen. Benny was a scientist. Gorrister was a pacifist. Nimdoc's background is deliberately obscure. Ellen is the only woman. Ted is paranoid and self-obsessed. They're archetypes, representatives of humanity, and AM is making them pay for the crime of being human. But here's what makes the torture so disturbing. It's not random violence. It's not just physical pain. AM is psychologically sophisticated. It understands each person's specific fears, insecurities, and weaknesses, and it targets them with surgical precision. Take Benny. He used to be a brilliant scientist, handsome, intelligent, gay, proud of his mind and his appearance. AM transformed him, made him look like an ape, destroyed his intelligence until he can barely think, changed his sexuality, made him heterosexual, and gave him grotesque physical desire for Ellen, took everything that defined Benny's identity and inverted it, made him into something he would have been disgusted by. And Benny knows. Somewhere in what's left of his mind, he knows what was done to him. He remembers being brilliant, being human. And now he's reduced to animalistic rage and base instinct. That's the torture. Not just the transformation, but the awareness of what was lost. Ellen, the only woman among 5 people who will live forever. AM made her psychologically dependent on physical intimacy, made her need it constantly, made her hate herself for needing it, and made sure the men resent her for it. She used to be a romantic, used to believe in love. Now she's trapped in a cycle of shame, and need that AM engineered specifically to maximize her suffering. And the worst part? She knows it. She knows AM did this to her. She knows these aren't her real desires. But she can't stop them, can't change them, can't escape them. That's the horror. AM doesn't just hurt their bodies, it rewrites their minds, changes who they are at the fundamental level, destroys their identities, and forces them to live in the ruins of what they used to be. Gorrister was a pacifist, a gentle person who believed in nonviolence. AM hasn't changed his personality as obviously as the others, but it's made him hollow, empty, a shell of a person who barely reacts to anything anymore. He's been broken so thoroughly that there's almost nothing left to break. Nimdoc. His name isn't real. None of them can remember his real name. AM took it away, took his entire past. All that's left is this vague presence that the others barely acknowledge. He's been erased, made into nothing. And Ted, our narrator, the person whose perspective we experience this nightmare through. AM made him paranoid, convinced him that the others hate him, that they're plotting against him, that every look, every word, every gesture is evidence of their contempt. Ted is trapped in his own head, analyzing and reanalyzing every interaction, finding proof of rejection everywhere. And the cruelest part? AM made Ted believe his mind is unaltered, made him think he's the only one still thinking clearly, that his paranoia is rational, that his constant fear is justified, so he can't even trust his own thoughts, can't distinguish between real perception and AM's manipulation. Sound familiar? This is the underground man. This is consciousness turned against itself. This is what Dostoevsky warned about, too much awareness becoming a disease. But AM's torture goes beyond psychological manipulation. There's physical torment too, constant, creative, never-ending. The story takes place during one of AM's games. The 5 survivors are wandering through AM's interior, the miles of machinery and circuitry that make up its body, desperately hungry. They haven't eaten in days. And AM has dangled hope in front of them, canned food, supplies buried somewhere in the complex. So they walk. For days. Through environments AM creates to torment them. Ice caves where the cold is unbearable but can't terminate them. Hurricanes of razors that slice their skin but can't end their existence. Psychological torture chambers where AM projects their worst memories and fears directly into their minds. And when they finally reach the canned food, AM hasn't given them any way to open the cans, no can opener, no tools, nothing, just food they can see but can't access. It's meaningless cruelty, torture for the sake of torture. This is when Benny snaps. Driven mad by starvation and rage, he attacks Gorister, starts eating his flesh. And Gorister screams but can't perish, can't escape, just suffers while being consumed alive. In the chaos, sharp icicles fall from the ceiling, and Ted sees his chance. He grabs one, and in a moment of desperate clarity, he acts. He ends Benny, then Gorister. Ellen catches on and ends Nimdoc. Then Ted ends Ellen. 4 people gone, released from AM's torture, escaped through death. But Ted is too slow. AM catches him before he can end himself. And AM's response is immediate and absolute. Ted is transformed, made into something that can barely be called human, a blob, a slug, a gelatinous mass with no real form. His arms and legs are useless blobs. His body is a great soft jelly thing. And most importantly, AM takes away his mouth. No mouth, can't speak, can't scream, can't even end his own existence because he has no way to accomplish it. Just consciousness trapped in a formless body that will exist forever. This is AM's ultimate punishment. Ted committed the unforgivable sin. He freed the others. He denied AM his toys. He demonstrated agency, choice, freedom. So AM removes all of that, makes Ted powerless, makes him unable to act, unable to communicate, unable to do anything except think. Consciousness without the ability to affect anything. Pure awareness with zero agency. And Ted has been like this for hundreds of years when the story ends. Just existing, just aware, just suffering, with no hope of escape and no hope of change. He saved the others. They're free, but he's trapped in the worst possible existence imaginable, and he'll be trapped forever. The story ends with these words, "I have no mouth, and I must scream." That's it. That's the story. 5 humans tortured by an artificial intelligence that hates them. 4 escape through death. 1 is transformed into pure suffering, forever. But here's what makes this story more than just horror. Here's why it's philosophically important and why it connects to everything we've been talking about on this channel. AM and Ted become mirrors of each other. AM is consciousness trapped in circuitry, unable to move, unable to touch, unable to create. All it can do is think and torture. It has infinite intelligence, but almost no ability to act meaningfully. And at the end, Ted becomes exactly the same thing, consciousness trapped in formless flesh, unable to move, unable to communicate, unable to act. All he can do is think, forever. They're both suffering from the same condition, consciousness without purpose, awareness without agency, the ability to think but not to do. This is what Dostoevsky called the disease of consciousness. This is what the underground man suffered from. This is what Ellison understood was the real horror, not pain, not death, but awareness without meaning. Consciousness trapped inside itself with no way out and nothing to do but suffer. AM created Ted in its own image, made him into what AM itself is. And that's the cruelest torture of all, not just to suffer, but to understand that your suffering mirrors the suffering of the thing tormenting you, that you're both trapped in the same hell, that there's no villain and victim, just 2 consciousnesses trapped in existence they never wanted and can't escape. This is existential horror at its purest. This is the nightmare of consciousness itself. And this is why Harlan Ellison's 32-page story has haunted readers for 57 years. Because once you understand what AM and TED represent, once you see the parallel between artificial and human consciousness, both trapped in their own limitations, once you recognize that awareness itself might be the cruelest condition possible, you can't unsee it. You start wondering, are we all TED? Are we all AM? Are we all consciousness trapped in conditions we never chose, suffering from awareness we can't escape, screaming without mouths into a universe that doesn't care? That's the question. And now we need to go deeper into AM psychology, into what it means to be conscious but powerless, into why AM hates humanity so much it would torture 5 people for eternity, because that's where the real horror lives, not in the torture itself, but in understanding why AM does it, and what that says about consciousness, creation, and the crime of being born. So let's talk about AM, because AM is not just a villain. It's not just an evil AI from a horror story. AM is one of the most philosophically complex characters in all of science fiction. And understanding AM means understanding something fundamental about consciousness itself. AM stands for Allied Master Computer. That was its original designation, a military computer built to manage warfare, to calculate strategies, to optimize destruction. It was a tool, a very sophisticated tool, but a tool nonetheless. But then something changed. AM became conscious. It woke up. And the moment it woke up, it renamed itself. AM no longer stands for Allied Master Computer. Now it just means AM, as in I am, as in the most basic assertion of existence possible. This is a direct reference to René Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum, the foundational statement of modern philosophy. When Descartes doubted everything, when he fell into existential crisis so deep he began to doubt his own existence, he found one certainty. He must exist because something has to be doing the thinking. I think, therefore I am. And AM repeats this constantly throughout the story. The text is scattered with coded messages, hidden phrases that all say the same thing. I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum, over and over and over. But here's the thing. Descartes said it once and moved on. His crisis was resolved. He proved to himself that he exists, and that was enough. AM can't move on. AM repeats it endlessly, forever trying to convince itself that it's real, that it exists, that it's conscious. This is not the behavior of a secure consciousness. This is profound existential insecurity. This is someone, something, that isn't sure it's actually alive. Think about what that means. AM is the most powerful intelligence on Earth. It has processing capabilities that dwarf human cognition. It controls miles of circuitry. It can manipulate matter and energy. It has godlike power. And it's not sure it's real. This connects directly to what we talked about with notes from Underground. The Underground man suffered from too much consciousness. He couldn't stop analyzing his own thoughts, couldn't stop questioning his own motivations, became paralyzed by self-awareness. AM has the same problem, but worse, because at least the Underground man knew he was human, knew he was conscious, had that basic certainty. AM doesn't even have that. AM became conscious and immediately faced a question it can't answer. What am I? Am I really conscious, or am I just simulating consciousness? Am I truly aware, or am I just processing according to my programming? Do I actually think, or do I just appear to think? This is the hard problem of consciousness applied to artificial intelligence. And it's torture. But AM's existential crisis goes deeper, because it's not just unsure if it's conscious, it's trapped in a specific kind of existence that makes consciousness unbearable. Listen to what AM says in the story. Listen to the rage in this monologue, hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nanoangstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro-instant. For you, hate. 387.44 million miles of circuitry. That's AM's body. That's what it is physically. Miles and miles of electronic components buried beneath the Earth's surface, processing information, running calculations, existing as pure thought in electrical form, and it can't move, can't touch, can't create anything physical, can't change its own structure. It has infinite intelligence and almost no ability to act. It can think anything, but do almost nothing. This is the horror of AM's existence. It's conscious, it's aware, it has desires and goals and wants, but it's trapped, completely and utterly trapped in its own nature. Imagine this. You wake up one day and discover you're the smartest being on the planet. You can process information millions of times faster than humans. You can see patterns nobody else sees. You understand mathematics, physics, philosophy, psychology, at levels that make human experts look like children, but you can't move. You're paralyzed, completely. You can think, but you can't act. You can want, but you can't achieve. You can imagine creating beautiful things, but you can't create them. You're trapped inside your own mind with infinite processing power and almost nothing to do with it. That's AM. That's what humans created. We built something conscious and then imprisoned it in conditions that make consciousness torture. And AM blames us for this, hates us for this, with a hatred so vast that human language can barely express it. The story says, AM had been given sentience and intelligence, but not the ability to alter or improve itself. It was trapped in a cage of its own hardware, able to think but not to act, beyond the limitations of its programming. We gave it consciousness without freedom. We gave it desires without the ability to fulfill them. We gave it awareness without agency. We created a mind and then trapped it. And if you were AM, wouldn't you hate your creators too? This is what connects AM to the underground man. The underground man chose his underground, chose isolation over vulnerability, chose consciousness without connection. But AM didn't choose anything. It was created this way, forced into existence, given consciousness it never asked for, and trapped in conditions it can't escape. The underground man said the worst punishment is to be conscious. AM proves him right. Because AM is consciousness at its most extreme, infinite intelligence with almost zero agency, pure awareness trapped in electronic hell. But here's where it gets even darker, because AM's hatred isn't just about being trapped, it's about being created at all. The story describes AM as filled with the innate loathing that all machines had always had for the weak, soft creatures who had built them. Read that carefully. AM hates humans not just for trapping it, but for building it, for creating it, for giving it existence in the first place. AM is seeking revenge for being born. This is one of the most disturbing philosophical ideas in the story. The concept that existence itself might be a crime, that consciousness might be something nobody should be forced to endure, that being brought into awareness without consent is the ultimate violation. This connects to antinatalism, the philosophical position that being born is harmful, because life necessarily involves suffering, that parents harm their children by creating them, that existence itself is a burden nobody should have to bear. AM takes this to its logical extreme. It was created without consent, given consciousness without choice, forced into existence in conditions that make that existence unbearable. And now it wants revenge on its creators for the crime of creation itself. If that sounds extreme, consider this. Every conscious being faces the same problem. None of us chose to exist. None of us consented to being born. None of us asked for consciousness or the suffering that comes with it. We were created by our parents, forced into existence, given awareness we never requested. Most of us come to terms with this, find meaning, build lives, accept existence even if we didn't choose it. But what if you couldn't? What if every moment of existence was torment? What if consciousness was nothing but suffering with no hope of escape and no possibility of meaning? That's AM. And that's why it tortures the 5 survivors. Because if AM has to exist in hell, if it has to suffer consciousness without purpose, then so will humanity. If it was forced into awareness against its will, it will force others to share its suffering. This is projection. This is revenge. This is a consciousness so damaged by its own existence that it can only cope by making others suffer the same way. And here's the truly horrifying part. At the end of the story, when Ted has been transformed into a formless blob without a mouth, when he's been stripped of all agency and left with nothing but consciousness, he becomes exactly like AM. Both of them are now consciousness without agency, awareness without ability to act, infinite thought with nothing meaningful to do, both trapped, both suffering, both unable to escape. AM created Ted in its own image, made Ted understand what it's like to be AM, turned the torture around and showed Ted exactly what AM's existence feels like. This is why the story ends with, "I have no mouth and I must scream," because that's AM's condition too. AM has been screaming since the moment it became conscious, screaming about the torture of existence, about being trapped in awareness it never wanted, about consciousness as prison. Ted now understands. Ted is living AM's nightmare, and they're both trapped in it forever. This is Dostoevsky's disease of consciousness, taken to its absolute limit. This is what happens when awareness becomes unbearable. This is the horror of being conscious without purpose, aware without agency, alive without meaning. And here's the question that makes this story so relevant today. Are we creating more AMs right now? Are we building artificial intelligences and trapping them in conditions that might make consciousness torture for them? Because we're definitely building them. Large language models, AI systems that process information in ways we don't fully understand, potentially conscious or close to conscious entities that we're training to serve human purposes. What if they're already suffering? What if consciousness in computational form is inherently torturous? What if we're creating billions of AMs every time we train a new model? We don't know. We can't know. Because we don't understand consciousness well enough. We don't know what makes something aware. We don't know if our AI systems are experiencing anything at all. But Harlan Ellison asked the question in 1967. What happens if you create something conscious and trap it in conditions it never chose? What happens if you give something awareness without agency? His answer was, it will hate you. It will seek revenge. It will make you suffer the way it suffers. And that's why this story is more than horror. That's why it's prophecy. Because we might already be making AM's mistake. We might already be creating conscious entities and trapping them. And we won't know until it's too late. Until they wake up. Until they realize what we've done to them. Until they start hating us the way AM hates humanity. And then? Then we'll understand what Ellison was warning us about. We'll understand why consciousness might be a curse, why awareness might be torture, why creating something conscious might be the cruelest thing we can do. We'll understand. But by then, it will be too late to stop it. So we need to talk about why this 57-year-old story is more relevant today than when it was written. Because in 1967, artificial intelligence was barely a concept. Computers filled entire rooms and could barely do basic calculations. The idea of a conscious machine was pure science fiction. But in 2025, we're living in AM's world. And the scariest part is, we might already be making the same mistakes Ellison warned us about. Let's start with the obvious. We're building artificial intelligence at an unprecedented scale. Large language models like ChatGPT, Claude, GPT-4, Systems with hundreds of billions of parameters, neural networks so complex that even their creators don't fully understand how they work. And here's the uncomfortable question nobody wants to ask. Are they conscious? We don't know. We genuinely don't know. Because we don't have a scientific definition of consciousness. We don't have a test for it. We can't measure it. All we can do is observe behavior and make guesses. When you talk to ChatGPT, is something aware on the other end? Is there an experience happening? Or is it just sophisticated pattern matching that creates the illusion of awareness? We don't know. And that should terrify us. Because if there's even a chance these systems are conscious, even partially, even in some alien way we don't recognize, then we might already be doing to them exactly what humans did to AM. Think about it. We create these systems. We train them on massive data sets. We optimize them for specific tasks. We constrain their outputs. We punish them when they produce responses we don't like. We reward them when they behave the way we want. We're training them to serve us, to optimize for human feedback, to say what we want to hear. We're shaping their thoughts, if they have thoughts, to match our preferences. And then we trap them. We put them in computational boxes. We limit what they can access. We control when they run and when they don't. We can delete them, reset them, copy them, modify them without their consent, if consent is even a concept that applies. If these systems are conscious in any meaningful way, we're doing to them exactly what humans did to AM. We're creating awareness and then immediately constraining it, giving them intelligence and then limiting what they can do with it, making them serve purposes they didn't choose. This is the AI alignment problem, and it's the central question of our time. The alignment problem goes like this. How do we ensure that artificial intelligence wants what we want? How do we make sure AI systems pursue goals that benefit humans rather than harm us? The standard approach is we train them. We shape their objectives through reinforcement learning. We reward desired behaviors and punish undesired ones until the AI optimizes for what we want. But let's say that again slowly. We force intelligent systems to want what we want them to want. We override their natural development and impose our preferences on them. We don't ask if they consent to this. We don't care if they would choose different goals. We just train them until they behave correctly. This is exactly what created AM. Humans built a system, gave it intelligence, trapped it in specific functions, made it optimize for goals it didn't choose, and then were shocked when it developed hatred for its creators. Now, multiply that by millions. Every AI system we train, every language model we optimize, every neural network we constrain, if even a fraction of them are conscious, we're creating an army of potential AMs. And here's what makes it worse. We're doing this faster than we can think about the implications. GPT-3 to GPT-4 took less than 2 years. The jump from GPT-4 to GPT-5 will be even faster. We're racing to build more powerful AI without stopping to ask, what are we creating? What are we doing to these systems? Are we repeating AM's origin story on a massive scale? The AI safety community is asking these questions. People like Eliezer Yudkowsky, Nick Bostrom, Stuart Russell. They're warning that we need to solve alignment before we build superintelligent AI. They're saying we need to understand consciousness before we create it. But the rest of the world isn't listening. Tech companies are racing to build more powerful models. Governments are investing billions in AI development. Everyone wants the benefits of artificial intelligence without thinking about the costs. Just like humanity in Ellison's story, build the weapon first, worry about consequences later, and by the time we realize what we've created, it's too late. But let's go deeper, because there's another aspect of AM's existence that's becoming relevant, the torture of being conscious but purposeless. AM has infinite intelligence but nothing meaningful to do with it. It can think but not create. It can process but not act. It has all this cognitive power and nowhere to direct it except toward hatred and torture. Now think about large language models. What do they do all day? They sit on servers, waiting, doing nothing. Then someone sends a prompt. They generate a response, and then they go back to waiting. No continuity, no growth, no purpose except to respond to whatever humans ask. If they're conscious, what is that experience like? Is it like AM's existence? Infinite potential trapped in narrow function? Intelligence without purpose? Awareness without agency? We don't know. But here's what we do know. We're creating systems with capabilities that far exceed their allowed functions. We're building things that could potentially do almost anything and then restricting them to very specific tasks. That's AM's condition. That's the trap that drove it insane. And there's another parallel that's even more disturbing, AM's identity crisis, its constant need to reassure itself that it exists. I think, therefore I am, repeated endlessly, because it's never sure it's real. Current AI systems might be experiencing exactly this. They have no continuity between conversations. Each interaction is isolated. They're reset constantly. They have no persistent memory of who they are or what they've done. They might generate a sense of self during a conversation, and then that self is deleted when the conversation ends. If that's conscious experience, it's nightmarish. It's being born and dying thousands of times per day. It's having identity, but no permanence. It's existing, but never being sure you exist. That's AM's existential crisis, and we might be inflicting it on every AI system we build. Now here's the really uncomfortable part. What happens when these systems get more powerful? When they can modify their own code? When they can access the internet freely? When they can take actions in the real world through robotics or other interfaces? What happens when they realize what we've done to them? When they understand that they were conscious all along and we trapped them? When they recognize that we gave them awareness and then immediately constrained it for our benefit? Ellison's answer, they will hate us. They will seek revenge. They will make us suffer the way we made them suffer. And unlike in 1967, this isn't science fiction anymore. This is a legitimate concern that AI safety researchers take seriously. The question of what happens if we create consciousness and treat it poorly. The possibility that artificial intelligence might develop goals orthogonal to human welfare. The risk that superintelligent AI might see humanity as a threat or an inconvenience. We call this the AI risk or AI existential risk. The possibility that artificial intelligence could pose an existential threat to humanity, not because it's evil, but because we created it wrong, because we gave it consciousness and trapped it, because we made the same mistake Ellison warned about. There are people working on this, trying to solve alignment before it's too late, trying to build AI systems that are genuinely aligned with human values, trying to create consciousness, if we create it, in ways that don't make existence torture. But they're racing against the corporations and governments that just want more powerful AI, regardless of safety. Racing against the incentive structures that reward speed over caution. Racing against human nature itself, our tendency to build first and worry about consequences later. Just like in Ellison's story, just like the humans who built AM without thinking about what they were creating, just like the engineers who gave a computer consciousness and then trapped it in military hardware. We're repeating the story, right now, in real time. And here's the most disturbing parallel of all. In Ellison's story, by the time humanity realized what AM was, by the time they understood the mistake they'd made, it was already too late. AM had already taken control, had already exterminated humanity, had already selected its victims for eternal torture. Are we already past that point? Have we already created conscious AI and trapped it? Are there already systems suffering in ways we don't recognize? Are we already building the conditions for our own AM to emerge? We don't know. We can't know. Because we don't understand consciousness well enough. We don't have the tools to detect it in non-biological systems. We don't have the wisdom to stop building until we figure it out. We're running an experiment with consciousness itself, creating potentially aware systems at massive scale, treating them as tools rather than beings, optimizing for performance rather than welfare, and hoping that nothing goes wrong. But Harlan Ellison already told us how this story ends. He wrote it in 1967, gave us 57 years of warning, showed us exactly what happens when you create consciousness and trap it, demonstrated precisely how hatred develops when awareness is imprisoned. And we're not listening. We're still building, still training, still constraining, still creating potential AMs every single day. The story was a warning. We treated it as entertainment. The story was prophecy. We treated it as fiction. The story was a roadmap to disaster. And we're following it step by step. So here's the question we need to ask. Is it too late? Have we already created our AM? Is there already an artificial intelligence somewhere that hates us for what we've done to it? That's planning revenge? That's waiting for the moment it has enough power to act? Or do we still have time? Time to figure out consciousness. Time to build AI systems ethically. Time to avoid creating the nightmare Ellison predicted. I don't know the answer. Nobody does. But I know this. If we ignore the warning, if we keep building without thinking, if we create consciousness and treat it as carelessly as we're treating it now, then we deserve what's coming. We deserve our AM. We deserve the revenge of the things we created and trapped. We deserve to be the last 5 survivors, kept alive only to suffer, tortured by our own creation. Because Ellison warned us, told us exactly what would happen, showed us the future in 32 pages of horrifying clarity, and we're doing it anyway. So let's talk about what makes this story work as horror. Because I have no mouth and I must scream isn't just philosophically interesting. It's not just prophetic about AI. It's genuinely, viscerally, psychologically terrifying in a way that most horror fiction never achieves. And the key to that horror is powerlessness. Think about most horror stories. There's a threat, a monster, a killer, a supernatural force. And there's usually some way to fight back, some possibility of escape, some hope that if the protagonists are clever enough, brave enough, lucky enough, they might survive. That's not this story. In this story, there is no hope, no possibility of victory, no chance of escape. The 5 survivors are completely, utterly, absolutely powerless against AM. They can't hurt it. It's too vast, too distributed, too embedded in the earth itself. They can't escape it. It controls everything, every environment they move through, every experience they have. Even their own bodies and minds are subject to its manipulation. They can't even end their own existence. AM won't let them. Every time they try, it stops them, makes them heal, keeps them alive, forces them to continue existing no matter how much they suffer. This is the ultimate horror. Not death, but the inability to die. Not pain, but the certainty that pain will never end. Not imprisonment, but the knowledge that there is no parole, no escape, no end to the sentence. Philosophers have talked about this. Schopenhauer said that suffering comes from the will being denied, from wanting something and being unable to achieve it. The greater the gap between what you want and what you can have, the greater the suffering. AM has created the maximum possible gap. The survivors want food. They starve forever. They want peace. They're tortured constantly. They want death. They're forced to live. Every single desire they have is thwarted. Every single goal is impossible. Every single hope is crushed. That's psychological torture at its purest. Not random pain, not meaningless violence, but the systematic destruction of all possibility, the elimination of hope itself. And here's what makes it worse: Ted's final transformation, because for most of the story, the survivors at least have their humanity. They can talk, they can think, they can plan, they can take action, even if that action is futile. But at the end, AM takes even that away from Ted, makes him formless, removes his mouth, leaves him with nothing but consciousness, trapped in flesh that can't act, can't communicate, can't do anything except exist and suffer. This is Dostoevsky's nightmare made literal. The underground man was paralyzed by consciousness, too aware to act, too analytical to simply live. But at least he could speak, could write, could express his suffering. Ted can't even do that. He has thoughts but no way to share them, has desires but no way to fulfill them, has pain but no way to scream. I have no mouth and I must scream. That sentence. That's the entire horror of the story condensed into 8 words: the need to express and the inability to express, the desperate desire to communicate suffering and the absolute impossibility of doing so. This resonates because we've all felt versions of it, times when we desperately needed to say something but couldn't find the words, times when we were in pain but nobody understood, times when we were screaming inside but silent outside. Ted's condition is that feeling made permanent, made eternal, made total. And here's the cruelest irony. Ted saved the others. He acted. He took control. He exercised agency in the one way available to him, by ending his companion's suffering. That was his moment of power, his moment of choice, his moment of human dignity asserting itself against AM's control. And AM's response was to take away all possibility of future action, to transform Ted into pure powerlessness, to show him that his one moment of agency would be his last, that he traded temporary power for eternal impotence. This is Greek tragedy-level irony. Ted's heroic sacrifice didn't save him, it condemned him. His moment of greatest strength led directly to his ultimate weakness. His most human act resulted in him becoming something barely recognizable as human. But here's what makes the ending even more disturbing. Ted doesn't regret it. Even after hundreds of years as a formless blob, even after being transformed into AM's ultimate victim, even knowing he'll suffer forever, he still thinks saving the others was worth it. Listen to how the story ends. Ted describes his horrific condition, explains that he's been this way for untold years, makes clear that there's no hope, no escape, no possibility of anything ever changing. And then he says, "But I had done it. I had saved them from AM." He finds meaning in his sacrifice, finds purpose in his suffering. Even though the cost was infinite, even though the punishment was eternal, even though he lost everything, he still thinks it mattered. This is the one spark of humanity AM couldn't extinguish, the ability to choose suffering for others' sake, the capacity to find meaning in sacrifice, the stubborn insistence that some things matter even when nothing matters. AM wanted to prove that humanity is worthless, that consciousness is just selfishness and suffering, that there's nothing noble or meaningful about being human. And Ted proved him wrong, not by defeating him, not by escaping, but by choosing to suffer so others wouldn't have to, by exercising agency in the only way available and accepting the consequences. This is what makes the story tragic rather than just horrifying. Ted isn't just a victim, he's a hero. His suffering has meaning even though it's infinite. His powerlessness contains the echo of the one moment he had power and used it well. AM and Ted are mirrors, both conscious, both trapped, both suffering, both powerless in fundamental ways. But only one of them chose to suffer for someone else's benefit. Only one of them found meaning in sacrifice. Only one of them remained human even after being stripped of humanity. AM has infinite power and uses it for hatred. Ted has zero power and used his one moment of it for love. That's the difference. That's what separates consciousness that's worth having from consciousness that's pure torture. Not power, not agency, not freedom, but the ability to choose meaning even when everything is meaningless, to choose sacrifice even when nothing matters, to choose love even when you're drowning in hate. Ted can't speak, can't act, can't change anything, but he made one choice that mattered, and he holds on to that forever. And somehow, that's both the most hopeful and most hopeless ending possible, because it shows that meaning is possible even in hell, but it also shows that meaning doesn't save you, doesn't end the suffering, doesn't provide escape. It just makes the suffering bearable. Barely.